So, welcome everyone. A quick note that we are recording and that the recording will be published on our YouTube channel, History at Newcastle. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land, wherever you may be located, and to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and in particular to the Pamalong clan of the Awabakal people of the land on which the Callaghan campus resides and where we in the room are located today. Our presenter today, Rebecca Willis, is a current PhD student in classics at the University of Newcastle. Her research focuses on the magical use of the human body in antiquity and in early modern Europe. Rebecca examines how the lens of magic can be used to provide new and comparative insights into various aspects of society, most notably the perceptions and interactions between individuals, their own embodied existence, and the physical environment in which they live. She is a recipient of the University of Newcastle Odyssey Travel Scholarship, which funds postgraduate research in Greece, and her paper today reports on that experience. Rebecca, over to you.
Thank you so much, Sacha, for that lovely introduction, and good morning, everyone. So this time last year, I was awarded with the University Odyssey Scholarship, and the purpose of my presentation here today is just to share with you my experiences of this scholarship and the important impact that travel opportunities like these do have on the research of classicists in Australia. My slides are going to behave. There we go. So the Odyssey Scholarship itself is an annual donor-funded award open to all HDR students in classics at our University of Newcastle. Each year, the chosen recipient is awarded a financial grant to conduct research in Greece, Rome, or a closely related country of the Mediterranean, such as Malta or Turkey. This scholarship was developed to address the often underestimated gap between students of classics studying here in Australia and the objects of our study that remain largely out of reach in the Northern Hemisphere. While online databases, maps and imaging continue to improve in their quality and accessibility, and of course they do remain central to our teaching and research of classics, they can at times still be a poor substitution for direct observation and experience that can be gained by visiting sites, museums and archives abroad. This is especially true of the Greek artefacts central to my own research, as many Greek museums and archives do not currently offer comprehensive digital access to their materials. So it was due to the Odyssey Scholarship that I was able to undertake a 3-week research trip to Greece in April this year. And I cannot overstate how much this experience has enriched my thesis research. Through this research trip, I've been able to deepen my understanding of key archaeological evidence beyond simply their published records, and develop new insights into current understandings of body studies in which my research really stands. And before I go much further to this presentation, I'd just like to take a moment to thank the donors, administrators of this scholarship, along with the members of the selection committee and those who supported me through my application process as well. To provide you a little background context for the research I conducted during this trip, my thesis examines the use of the human body in acts of magic, particularly in the multicultural tradition of magic practiced in the ancient Pan-Mediterranean. That is the shared traditions of Greece, Rome and Egypt between 400 BCE and 600 CE. Central to my research is the human body itself, and that is because the human body remains one of the few universal materials that practitioners of magic shared throughout history and across cultures. How practitioners and their contemporaries choose to interact with bodies in this context provides a uniquely comparative window into the crossover point between both magic, practice, and body studies. And this area I have termed body magic. In the ancient Pan-Mediterranean, popular narratives written by non-magicians present body magic as gruesome and abhorrent concept, practiced only by barbarians and the most vile witches, often alongside taboo acts like cannibalism or infanticide. But little is actually known about the reality of body magic as it was perceived and practiced by the magicians themselves. And this is the gap that I aim to expose through my research. Through analysis of over 800 primary magical sources, my research has so far established the reality of body magic to be considerably far from this ancient propaganda. Rather, it was a fairly common practice, largely devoid of the overinflated negative reports in contemporaneous media. I have catalogued a database of body magic, exploring the frequency and variation in the use of different body parts and products, their origins, and the multifaceted roles in different acts and types of magic. However, I remain very conscious of the most common critique that is applied to textual-based research like this, and that is the lack of archaeological support. So I wanted to further enrich my study by expanding beyond the textual evidence and incorporating a parallel survey of archaeological evidence as well. I specifically wanted to look at the presence of body magic within the most common type of artifact, and that is the cursed tablet. There have been hundreds of these found throughout the ancient pan-Mediterranean world. And for those of you not familiar with this term, this here on the slide is a cursed tablet in its most common form, a lead sheet on which a spell was inscribed. The tablets are then rolled or folded, sometimes having nails driven through them. They are then deposited somewhere where they were believed not likely to be found, usually graves or bodies of water. The example on the right here is a more impressive version, and this is the inscribed lead sheet has actually been moulded into a container for a small figure, which actually represented the target of the spell. And you can also see the holes in the top here where there were nails originally present. But practically as soon as I chose this area to expand my research, I hit a snag. Direct examination of human biological material and artifacts of magic does not currently exist, not even in the most well-published area of cursed tablet finds. Now that wasn't the snag, I did fully expect that to be the case. But as I was shifting through the existing reports, the databases and the surveys of these artifacts, aside from quite literally a handful of human hairs, I found that human biological material was completely absent from the published record. This led me to the primary purpose for my trip. I needed to find out if this lack of evidence was actually because human biological material was not present in the archaeological record, or if this was something that had simply not been considered by previous scholars and had not yet been published on. The question may seem a little unfairly critical of the current scholarly record, but it's not unfounded. If we consider the few examples of hair that have been found in cursed tablets, there are three clear issues that can be seen. Firstly, many of the tablets that contain hair make direct reference to the hair in their inscribed text, making it very clear for its origin and purpose. But this is not always the case. A number of cursed tablets, such as the Supplementarium Magicum 41 and 71, also make very clear reference to hair being used in this way and deposited with the tablet, despite no hair actually being found. The reverse is also apparent. Supplementary Magicum 40 makes no mention of hair in the inscribed text whatsoever, but was found to contain human hair within its folds all the same. So the inscribed text of these tablets cannot accurately be used to determine the presence of biological material in the archaeological record. And for many early scholars, these inscribed texts were the primary authority guiding their relevant scholarship. Building from this point, the third issue here is that the theoretical material I have previously examined in my thesis, that most of which the original excavators did not have access to, indicates that although hair was popular, it was not the only biological material that could be used for this purpose. Nail clippings, blood, and urine were also used in the same manner. But because this was not known, was this something the early excavators and conservators would actually consider checking for, especially when only hair had been previously found? I had 4 key questions to answer then. Firstly, I needed to verify if historical archaeological excavations of magic artifacts conducted assessments for the presence of human biological remains. And if they did not, why was this the case? As many of the early finds are now over a century old, I also needed to confirm if any of the more recent examinations may have taken place now that these artifacts are securely catalogued and stored in museums and archives, or if there was any current plans to do so. Additionally, although such finds are becoming increasingly rare, with many of the key sites now thoroughly examined and excavated, it remains likely that others will be discovered in new sites in the future or recovered from private collectors. So I was curious to understand if any specific protocol for such biological testing might exist for future finds. Now, I decided to focus my examination on Greece because although these items have been found across the wider Mediterranean, most of these are only 1 or 2 examples spotted across a significant geographical distance. And those that were not sold into private collections remain very much distributed across many different museums and archives in small numbers. The largest deposits that remain intact as a single collection for examination are Greek. Additionally, Greece is considered the home of the cursed tablet as a form of magic and was the country that saw the most tablets created during the peak of this practice. Now, the tablets in Greece have not been excluded from private collection trade, and we do still see some singular examples dotted about the country in local museums and archives, typical of other countries in this region. However, the city of Athens is currently home to two of the largest and most well-researched deposit locations in the country, and that is the Athenian Agora and the Keramikos archaeological site, which possess a combined total of 130 cursed tablets. So this is where I focused the first half of my trip. I began by collecting all the information I could about these 130 artefacts from current publications, establishing a timeline of excavation, a catalogue of published data, and then, of course, discovering that the identification tags used in these public works did not match the inventory tags in the institutions that currently administrate these excavation sites. I then cross-referenced each artefact description and excavation data to reconcile the different bodies of work into one coherent catalogue, which is one way to pass a 22-hour plane trip. Once actually arriving in Greece, though, I set out to visit both archaeological sites and their associated museums. The Agora site, being the main marketplace of ancient Athens, has so far excavated a total of 30 tablets from various water sources, including their wells, cisterns, and baths. While the Keramikos site has uncovered a further 98 artefacts between wells located in what was the main ceramic industry location for Athens and the cemetery located just outside the nearby city of Willis. These two collections alone represent nearly a quarter of all known tablets excavated in Greece and offer a solid cross-sample for this artefact type. I spent quite a few hours walking through the excavated areas of these sites, following the paths of the excavators and viewing the find spots. I did this to gain a deeper geographical understanding of the find sites and better contextualise the historic location, something that I found to be largely absent in the short reports that address the artefacts excavations. In some cases, I found myself quite surprised actually with the public nature of these find locations, where traditionally magic deposits were made in secret. But some of the locations of these artefacts have been found carried a clear and noticeable risk of discovery. In the Keramikos site, for example, many of the tablets were found in graves, but some were attributed to monument graves of the Lacedaemonians, which is located just off the main road, metres from the city gate, somewhere much more public than I would ever expected. These visits actually had quite the impact on my perception of these artefacts, and I was not really expecting that. It is sometimes a little too easy, especially when working with large data sets and surveys, to remove these artefacts from their wider context and neglect their unique nature in favour of their similarities. I'm really quite grateful to have the chance to pull back from the theoretical examination of these artefacts for a moment and view them as individuals as part of a wider archaeological record of their find site, to consider them not as isolated acts of magic, but part of one wider echo of daily life. In order to answer my questions, though, I needed to go beyond the publicly accessible scholarship and investigate the original archival records. The Agora site artefacts and all relevant records are currently administered by the American School of Classical Studies, and likewise the Keramikos site artefacts are maintained by the German Archaeological Institute. During my trip, I engaged with key staff at both organisations, most notably Dr. Strozek, Dr. Kazarski, and Afeza, for whose assistance I am incredibly grateful. The result of these discussions were further expanded by my introduction to some key international scholarship by Dr. Strozek, and eventually I was able to confirm the following results. Firstly, I verified that the 130 cursed tablets historically excavated across these sites were not tested for human biological materials when they were first discovered, nor are there any archival records indicating non-published material, having been recovered, or any intent to examine these artefacts for non-visible biological residue. Why this was the case is a little less certain, as no direct records actually discuss the decision not to consider this potential, but the context of early archaeology indicates this most likely occurred due to a combination of a lack of awareness for the potential of biological material, as I previously suggested, and also a lack of today's technology that could facilitate easy examination for biological residue when it was not visually apparent. While somewhat disappointing, this outcome was not unexpected. Archaeological excavations during these early periods simply did not have access to the contextual knowledge or technology that would have invited an investigation for biological material. Unfortunately, it's also very possible that other examples of overt body magic, like hair, has gone missing during this period. A number of these artefacts that currently show no body magic were found to have been relocated from their original deposit locations, some of these disruptions occurring during late antiquity, such as the case for 4 tablets that were found in a layer of fill used for road repair in later antiquity in the Keramikos site, while others have been discovered in discarded fill of earlier excavations, either unbeknownst to the original excavators or perhaps knowingly discarded in favour of more valuable artefacts. So it does remain possible that other artefacts currently without biological material may have originally possessed it. The possibility is further heightened when you consider that on at least one occasion, the hair was not wrapped in the lead, but around it, and exposed to the elements and very easily separated. But thinking only of what we have found, of course, not what we have lost, the potential for biological residues such as blood and urine likely were not visible to the lead on the naked eye. Has anyone thought to revisit these collections with modern techniques such as organic residue analysis, chemical analysis, or biomarker analysis to check for body magic? No, they have not. Despite the fact that many of these artefacts have been subject to re-examination over the years, these examinations have not included testing for previously unidentified biological material. In fact, to my knowledge, no additional biological examinations have taken place on the few known examples of hair either. The reasoning behind this is again quite understandable, if unfortunate. Many of these artefacts were subject to early damaging conservation practices such as acid washing, the consequences of which would have destroyed any potential biological residue. For other, less damaged artefacts, the ones that are most likely to potentially contain biological material are those that remain unrolled and sealed. Attempts to open these have significant risk of damage to the artefact itself, and in particular its inscriptions. And while new technological advancements are beginning to digitally unroll these using X-ray tomography imaging, these examinations remain focused on deciphering the inscribed texts, not the potential presence of biological material within its folds. So what about the handful of artefacts that are open and did not undergo these sorts of damaging practices, or any future finds that we may be able to open? For the time being, unfortunately, the answer is not much different. Although we do now have technology to identify the presence of biological residue, this technology remains limited in accessibility and particularly in cost. There are no current plans for any biological examination of previous finds from these two collections, nor have I been able to find any similar plans elsewhere. Furthermore, there are no standing procedures for new finds to be examined in this way by the American or German institutes, nor the overarching authority of the Greek Archaeological Service and Ministry of Culture. Now, with this information, I was able to address each of my research questions, providing quite a valuable insight into the practical constraints influencing my survey and its unequal data spread. But it also presented another result that I was not really expecting. By delving into the archaeological context of my subject matter, I realised that my research had a wider-reaching practical implication for conservation and excavation of artefacts of magic. I had come to learn that one of the primary reasons an artefact is put forward for biological examination is the expectation of a positive result. Without visible indication to guide these decisions, the researchers need to have reasonable expectation that the biological residue may be present due to the artefact's historical context. And in most cases, preliminary analysis seeking positive residue markers will only occur after this can be produced. And this is something that is currently missing from the wider context of magic studies, restricting archaeological justification for any further examinations. The purpose of my research was always to establish body magic in the wider tradition of magic, to assess its presence and explore its contextual role in the wider consideration of the human body. This trip has made me acutely aware of the practical implications this research will have in the archaeological study of magic. Once completed, my work will offer the first substantial scholarly support for the presence of biological residue in artefacts of magic. And by presenting a new awareness of this potential for body magic artefacts in our archaeological record, this research will provide a long-awaited scholarly support for future residue analysis. I also had a secondary reason for going on this trip, and my second purpose of this trip is because as part of my examination into body use and perception in this period, I want to look at the perspective of magic. It's necessary for me to contextualize this exploration through other non-magic forms of body use in the ancient Mediterranean. And while the body was certainly a topic of interest in many different aspects of Greek, Roman, and Egyptian culture, perhaps most famously in very artistic mediums of this period, in almost all occasions, the body in Greek and Roman thought was considered in these contexts only as a whole. And that is a key difference to the magical perceptions I have uncovered. In the context of magic, although the body of a whole is present, it's unusual. And more commonly, the perception of the human body was a series of potential parts and products. And while this is unusual for the treatment of the human body, it demonstrates the unique context of magic, seeing the body as ingredients and components, targets and tools. At first look, it might be easy to link this only to the treatment of non-human bodies. Animals were very commonly physically dissected for meat and other products, in a way that was considered abhorrent if used on a human. And this treatment justified a conceptual dissection as well. And by this I mean that while the animal was still physically whole prior to slaughter, they were still being perceived as a series of parts preemptively. And this can often influence their treatment and care prior to the part or product of interest being separated from that whole. Generally speaking, though, this was not the case for the human body. It was overwhelmingly focused on the body as a singular whole unit. In Greek and Roman culture, though, there was one other space where this conceptual dissection of the human body was demonstrated, not just as a rare diversion from the norm, but as actually the main form of body use, and that is the anatomical votive. Anatomical votives, and I have some examples for you here on the slide, these are for the most part models of body parts. In later Roman examples, we also see models expanding into internal organs. And these have been dedicated to healing sanctuaries, most commonly sanctuaries of the healing god Asclepius, known as Asclepions. There's some debate about their exact purpose and the order of the ritual dedication, but we know that when someone was ill or injured, one avenue they could seek healing from was the religious healing sanctuaries of Asclepion. In most cases, the patient would make a pilgrimage to this sanctuary asking for healing. Here, they would undergo ritual purification, taking prayers, dedications, and sacrifices to the god, guided by the sanctuary's priests and attendants, with the goal of obtaining divine healing for their problem. Like many other religious sanctuaries, pilgrims seeking their god's aid or goodwill would also provide gifts in the form of votives. But in these sanctuaries, there was a unique tradition of dedicating an anatomical votive as part of this religious healing rite. The votive would depict the part in need of healing, often in life-size sculpture, as you can see here, or as carved in stone relief. Most importantly, though, is the fact that the patients did not simply provide a full self-portrait. They were not representing their whole body, but only the part in need of healing, be it an arm, a hand, a breast, a torso, or so on. Some scholars believe these were occasionally dedicated prior to the healing taking place as almost a visual request to the god, particularly if the injured or ill person could not make the pilgrimage themselves. But the generally accepted views supported by the inscriptions found in a large portion of votives were that these were dedicated to the god's temple after a healing occurred as almost a thank you. They also function as a visual review page for the sanctuary. New incoming patients would walk into the sanctuary complex and see these items all over the walls. They would see how successful the sanctuary was at providing healings, what type of healings, and could actively read inscriptions of gratitude from past patients. The most important aspect of this for me was the non-magical context of this use. In the earlier, more traditional forms of this practice, they were entirely occurring in the religious context. Later, these sanctuaries expanded and became hotspots for the practice of more secular medical care, and as they still remained very much removed from the magical sphere. And I really want to stress here that this is not something we see occurring in magical contexts. They were magical uses for the human image, of course, and for sculptured figures, but they were not used in the same way. So this demonstrates a mixture of parallel thinking and perhaps some two-way conceptual influences on the unusual perception of the body in parts. Although there are several Asclepions across Greece, there are three key sites that, due to their size and impressive preservation record, are most well known for anatomical votives. These are the Athenian Asclepion, located on the southeastern slope of the Acropolis, the Asclepion of Epidaurus in the Peloponnese, and the Asclepion of Corinth. In addition to each of these three sites, I also plan to visit each of their associated local museums and the National Archaeological Museum located in Athens, as it's currently housing many of votives that have come from the Epidaurus site. Now, unfortunately, shortly before I arrived in Greece, I discovered the Corinth Asclepion was temporarily closed to the public due to urgent repair work, and that the museum's collection was also unavailable for public viewing due to the same cause. As I did not have enough time to organise a private viewing, I had no choice but to skip this site during my trip. Thankfully, Corinth is one of the best published of the three votive collections, so although unfortunate, this change in plan did not have as big of an impact as it could have to my research. Starting in Athens, I first set out to see the Asclepion on the slopes. Originating in the 4th century BCE, not much of the temple currently remains, as you can see from the image in here. This is about all that's left to actually see on the slopes itself. It's settled in behind the theatre of Dionysus, right in front of a natural mineral spring that was acclaimed to have medical properties. What is most interesting of this site, though, is that despite it being the smallest of the 3 sites, excavation in this location are disproportionately rich, with a large collection of votives discovered here and now located in the Acropolis Museum. To offer a better look at what this would actually have looked like at the time, there's this wonderful little plaque I have down here for you. And you can see here the votives were dedicated to a temple. They were displayed often on walls, as you can see behind the kneeling individual. We have a torso, legs and arms decorating the walls as displayed votives. But you can also see that although proportions of the wall votives are fairly lifelike, the votive leg being held by the individual on the left here is clearly much larger. Their sizes are not exactly standard. Like traditional votives, size and the rarity of materials that were used are often used by richer individuals for votive design. The most common type of votive can be seen on the left here, and that is a variety of body parts represented. Now, like other temples, the Asclepion would be usually overrun with votives, and these would be regularly cleared out by the attendants and ritually disposed of, often in a local burial pit. And this is where the 4 votives in the leftmost image were found. It can be assumed they were left on the wall for a period of time following their initial dedication by a patient before being cleared out. But this is not always the case. As a statement to the richer clientele that would have visited this site alongside the common people, some of the votives from this site demonstrate considerable wealth in their materials and skill. You can see this when you compare particularly the 2 images here. This one on the right is a beautifully carved piece of marble with specially made coloured inlays for the eyes. Compared to the votives on the left, you can see the craftsmanship is much lower and these pieces are also much smaller. Now, unlike the standard votives that would be cycled along, these finest and most significant votives were kept for far longer and actively placed on permanent display in the temple for future visitors. You can see this in action here with the marble eyes on the right. This pillar was created to house custom votive pieces, so you've got custom slots here. And only one of these remains in place, but you can see how it would have been designed for very specific pieces that they chose to display. Before I left Athens, I also made a visit to the National Archaeological Museum, where the majority of artefacts from the Asclepion of Epidaurus are located. Unfortunately, that specific room within their sculpture collection is roped off during my visit, so I was left peering around a corner, leaning as far as I could to get a photo, much to the concern of a nearby security guard, so my somewhat terrible photo is there. As terrible as it is, though, you can make out the very similarities in the common pieces from the Acropolis. So we have an upper ear, 2 breasts. One of them actually shows a lump, which is clearly protruding from the side, indicating exactly what the issue was to be healed. There's also male and female genitalia and a set of eyes. After this, I made my way to the Asclepion of Epidaurus in the Peloponnese. This sanctuary is one of the most famous and prestigious healing sanctuaries in ancient Greece, the largest on the mainland, and it was a standalone site, unlike the Acropolis. And this was a site purely dedicated to healing, and it was a prominent location for pilgrimages. Included in this site is a large theatre that is beautifully preserved, facilities for physical exercise and rehabilitation, and other artistic practices as part of a more holistic healing method. There are dedicated accommodation sites for pilgrims and those accompanying them, but did not require healing, a number of small temples enshrined to various affiliated deities, and also evidence of clear medical practices in the scientific sense took place here by doctors. It was also believed at one point to be a location for medical education. So like the Athenian Asclepion, anatomical votives were deposited here to be displayed in the sanctuary itself, and those would have formed part of the visual atmosphere that this location employed to highlight and encourage healing. Within the site, the current administration also runs a small museum, which you can see at the base of the slide here. So this is the little museum spot. And as soon as you walk in, one of the first things you see is this excellent votive vase. This is just a copy in plaster. The original is actually carved in marble and has evidence of gold gilding. But more interesting is the inscription on it, which states this was erected in gratitude for the curing of deafness, dedicated by Curtius, king of the Alpine Gauls. And this piece is dated to the year 8 or 9 BCE. There are 2 things in particular that struck me about this piece. First, who it was from. Despite the fact this was a Greek sanctuary dedicated to the Greek god Asclepius, this was a king of Gaul who made deliberate pilgrimage here for healing at this location and travelled far out of his kingdom to do so. This really demonstrates, I think, the presence of this practice in wider Greek society and washing into neighbourhood regions. In magic, the use of body in parts is seen as odd compared to the standard body perceptions of the time, and it's often tempting to write this off simply as another weird, non-conforming tactic of magicians deliberately deviating from social norms. But this prolific use of atomical votives demonstrates something very different. Yes, it was unusual. It was not the most common way someone would interact with the human body. But the deconstruction of the body into parts did clearly have a standing accepted place in the social consciousness outside of magic. One we can assume that magicians and their clients would have been well aware of, if not had actively participated in both Greece and Rome. Exactly what the relationship is between these two practices is yet to be confirmed, but this demonstrates that there is a clear need to better understand these practices and their potential interactions, something I've started to explore and research since returning home and will be continuing in the coming months. The other key takeaway from this votive was a new, more authentic understanding of their purpose in the sense of advertisement. In the displays at the Acropolis and National Museum, the votives were in a special dedicated case among other displays. They were comparatively quite small and not very prominent. But here in the small space of the Epidaurus Museum displayed the votive on the wall, high above head height, just as you would expect them to be in the temple. And while other artefacts displayed around them were not votives necessarily, their placement and material continued to maintain the atmosphere of a dedication wall full of votives. And it was easy to imagine myself in the position of a pilgrim arriving for healing, seeing these life-size works crowding the walls, each acting as proof of success and listing names from around the known world of people who had travelled here for that purpose. This is something that is very hard to truly conceptualise when viewing individual images of votives in books and websites, and something that really demonstrates the value of trips like this, which allow a researcher to actively engage with their subject and experience it in a new way. And overall, this became one of my main takeaways from this trip. Yes, I arranged this trip to access archival records and artefact reports that were out of reach in Australia, and doing this has had a very practical impact on my research, allowing me to explore beyond the published data and answer questions that really haven't been addressed before. Certainly, it furthered my research and opened up new avenues for thesis work. But funnily enough, I almost feel that the immaterial takeaways from this trip were just as significant. Establishing a relationship with international scholars in my field and professional networks in adjacent areas, tracing the steps of the figures I am researching and gaining an appreciation for their geographical reality of their lives, gaining an authentic appreciation for their experiences and the artefacts they created. Many of the artefacts and locations I visited during this trip I had seen before in photos and documentaries. I had read about them in great detail, but there was something very different about seeing them in reality and physically engaging with them in the locations they belong. It's a feeling I can't quite put into words, and I was trying to find the right word for this presentation. And the others who have experienced similar trips to their research subjects, they all knew exactly what I was talking about, but we couldn't quite find a word to fit it. One of the key purposes of this presentation, though, is to better publicise this opportunity for our current and future students. And I can only say absolutely go for it. If this is something you are interested in, if you are eligible, please do apply for the Odyssey Scholarship. It is an experience you will not regret. And if there are any students listening to this who maybe are thinking they would like to apply, please feel free to contact me. I am happy to discuss anything to do with the scholarship, the application process with you. Otherwise, speak to your supervisors and to graduate research as well, because it is absolutely worth the effort. Thank you very much.
Fantastic, thank you. Let me just, yeah, that was really, really interesting. I'd like to open the floor to questions.
I have a technical question. I like technical
Absolutely.
In a hypothetical world where you have the resources to do testing of artefacts, in theory, is it possible to rule out contamination by other biological residue?
Some of it, yes, not all of it. So hair in particular is terrible for that, because is it a hair coming from someone who has been excavated?
Yeah,
is it a hair because it's there? It's actually a big issue when it comes to residue analysis that there's a number of scholars saying we need to be wearing hair nets, we need to be doing this, we need to be doing that. There is ways you can do it to minimise external influences, but actually doing that is something that's not very common these days. It's getting more common, thankfully, but it's not currently the most common practice. And when you're looking at the historic examples, no, it's very hard to know for sure. And that's one of the things that got me about the hairs that we do have, because we haven't tested them. We haven't done carbon dating or anything like that to see how old they are. We're assuming they were the hairs that came with it because of where we found it in the context.
Yeah.
And I mean, to be fair, the ones wrapped around it, we could probably assume were deliberately placed there, not by just the excavator finding a hair. But usually there is this question, and that's where I want more testing to be done to know for sure. When it comes to things like blood and urine, I think it's more likely to say for sure, yes, it's ancient, just purely because if it was fresh, the residue would be much fresher. You would almost be able to see the stain. It would be a little bit different in that sense. And the chances of the residue getting to inside the folds of the lead from the excavator compared to, it would more happen in the conservation lab. And the conservation lab, you should be wearing gloves, you should know what's going on, everything should be recorded. So if they did actually cut themselves, they would know.
Yeah.
So I think it's less likely to occur there in those sorts of areas, but it's one area that we haven't really explored. So we don't know for sure what level of contamination could possibly be occurring there, unfortunately.
And if I may follow up on that, what proportion of your artefacts would you need to find evidence of residue for it to be meaningful for your argument?
Meaningful for my argument, I think realistically just what we do have, because to my extent what I'm trying to prove is this was not the most common form of magic. There are a million different ways you could practice magic. Animals were very, very common. Plant life was very common. The human body was not the most common, but it needs to be recognised as part of the toolkit. It was actually used. It wasn't just theory-based. And the fact that we do have those hairs does say, at least to an extent, it is not pure theory. We know that it was practiced in some cases. So we can expand beyond the pure theoretical argument. I'd like to expand that further in other types. So we have the hair. I'd like to see it proved for blood. I'd like to see it proved for urine. For nail clippings would be excellent. Unfortunately, because it's biological material, very little actually survives. So to an extent, it's going to be impossible to say for sure everything that has happened because you just don't have the evidence. It's going to be disposed of. You wouldn't survive.
And if it's in water, it presumably decays more.
Absolutely. And then you've got the issues of the ones that have been dumped in graves, how much of that has been contaminated with the grave. There's a lot of other bits and pieces, so it makes it very difficult. But we have the same argument with animals, with the plant material as well. We have so much theory, but actually finding the practical, usually it's little bits here and there to prove that it did happen as a support for the theory. But we don't have the evidence to say for sure, look, we have this wonderful piece of evidence to say we know for a fact it's been done at the same percentage. We don't have that and we're not going to get it. So anything is valuable, I would say, to answer your question. I would absolutely be ecstatic with anything, but I would love to see other types of biological material as the main point, rather than just the hair that we have. Thank you.
If I may follow on with another technical question, I was thinking about the rolled up tablets and the fact that they might contain material, and as soon and I was, my immediate thought was, you could use X-rays like they'd be using for the scrolls and from Pompeii, and then I thought, no, it can't be possible because they're lead, and there's issues there. But you seem to imply that there are possibilities to.
There are some that are using certain topography scanning and X-ray scannings.
So if you're doing that kind of scanning sufficient to be able to penetrate the lead, would you even see the hair?
Don't know, to be honest. I was trying to find out if that was the case, because also we're not talking about a large strand. Often it's a little tiny clipping. And I've had a look at some of these scans and they're not, they're excellent considering we're sitting inside a closed piece of lead, but it's hard to work out between the many different folds. I don't know if you'd actually be able to see something like that. I think you'd need to be specifically looking for it and specifically trained in it, which I'm not. And to my knowledge, no one is, which is the hard bit. There's no one actually out there doing that. Everyone's really interested in the inscriptions and digitally unrolling them, which is great. But I'd also like to know if there's anything else contained within it personally. I'd like to know all those sorts of things. There's no way of telling at the moment with what our current technology is.
Other questions? Yes.
Are curse tablets DIY, or is there a market in them?
Both. So we do know that some were done by professional magicians. There is a particular well in actually in the Agora, there's a particular well that had like 8 pieces all written in the same hand, but cursing different people and clearly different things. So we reckon this was a professional
Very vindictive individual.
Some of them were on behalf of women, some were on behalf of men. It clearly seemed to be a professional scribe, if nothing else was writing this. And you can assume probably if you're doing magic, you wouldn't just go to a random scribe and pay them under the table to write this. You'd probably go to a magician who was also a scribe. And then other ones were clearly, they're all individually handwritten and they're all thrown into the same communal well. So they're just being used by individuals. We know that people were actually stealing lead from lead pipes to turn into these. Some are actually advised to do that because the cold water from the lead pipe had symbolic the coldness and the chill, and you're trying to chill the person that you're affecting. So it was all meant to be, it's all very symbolic in the magic.
So you know about advice. So there are other ways of getting
how to get access to it and what you should be doing here and what you should be doing there. And then you've got the DIYers that are clearly just a lump of lead that someone's got inscribed really questionable spelling and everything else. Like he's not literate, you know, absolutely.
Some of the ones in Bath.
Yes, the handwriting in
the
Bath.
handwriting's on them's terrible.
Yeah, and some of them you can clearly tell it's almost like this isn't their first language, but this is the language of the cursed tablets. This is what I need to do to make it happen, and we throw it in there as well. And it's you can tell there's clearly a full level of professional to absolute DIY and in between as well.
Reminds me of an amulet, a folded lead amulet that I saw reported in from the Levant, where basically when they unfolded it, they found it had letters from several alphabets, none of them actually making any words or something. It's just the magic of having words on this thing. Ian, I think you had a question.
Yeah, some fond memories there in the photos. Good to see the National Archaeological Museum is still difficult beast to get around. I've experienced similar sort of closures of areas. And the German Archaeological Institute, that they're able to be helpful again. I think that's really important connection there. Just something that occurs to me, a previous study I was involved with on Roman sarcophagi, where you had marble and a very high-end lead sarcophagi, where it seemed the pattern that the biological material, i.e. the skeleton, would often preserve well within the marble, but the lead would have, you'd be lucky to get teeth out of. Like lead and biological material are not happy roommates. So there's an inherent challenge there. And anything you find in a collection would have been cleaned. So in residue analysis is probably going to give you a poor return. But in your discussions with the American team, the Keramikis team, did they describe any excavation protocols for when they encounter lead? Like, I mean, it's in pipes, it's in roofing, that like in the handling of lead, it can be an issue just to the excavator for a start. But in terms of like bagging it, especially for potential later analysis, is there any sort of process that they touched on there that might lead to the possibility if they pull something out next season that it's therefore available?
That's what I was hoping to find. I was really hoping, because I knew the damage of the previous practices probably wouldn't leave much left for residue if we even had the opportunity to do it. I was really hoping if we found something in the future, could we maybe is that something they would do? I talked to it's the German Archaeological Institute that has the Keramikos at the moment.
Okay.
And they have no active protocols for biological testing for magical artifacts.
No, but for
and
collection of the lead for the
nothing
excavation and
specific that
treatment of
they
the lead.
gave me that would have an influence in this. They wouldn't give me the full protocol that they actually have. They just do the standard protocol. They just didn't give me the full details of it. But when I was asking specific to the impact for the biological stuff, no, nothing in particular. They said they would bag it and they would collect it in a way that wouldn't allow for modern contamination, is what they said. But I mean, to the extent they didn't give me the details of what that actually meant and at what point that would be impacted, it makes it very difficult to say for sure, for the point of view of residue analysis, whether that would be something that could be affected.
Thanks.
I'm just slightly puzzled by one little bit, which is if they looking at an artifact and it's got hair, it's fairly obvious perhaps that it's hair.
Yes.
But you say they have urine and blood, but that's just going to be either almost invisible or just a stain, which could be anything.
Yes.
So they have to test it in order to decide that it is urine or blood, which in a sense is the first stage towards, you do that test, why not carry on with, I don't know, a DNA test if you can do that, but something else, because you wouldn't know you wouldn't know it was blood or urine. That's
Exactly, absolutely. It's practically invisible. If it was on lead, it would be invisible, generally speaking.
So they have to do some sort of test if they.
There's a preliminary test, and then if the preliminary test says yes, this is likely to be, it comes in the range of likely to be human residue, they then put it forward for additional testing, depending on what type of residue comes forward. So it's usually biological analysis testing, or it could also be a chemical analysis testing or whatever it is. But just getting into that first step, I've found is near impossible, because they won't do that first, just possibly let's test it, see what's going on. They don't do that for everything they find. They don't do the preliminary test for everything. They have to have a stain that they're actually interested in finding. So you might find it in cloth. If there's actually a stain on the cloth, they might go, oh, well, this might be a blood stain, let's have a look. But for the lead, they won't test it without reason. And we don't have the scholarly support to say there will be blood there, or there's a good chance of finding blood for them to go and do the first test, let alone the second test. And that's the sort of bit that's missing at the moment.
With the hair, do they do anything like male or female? Can they?
I haven't found any testing actually done on the hair. All the records just note hair was
Can
found.
you can do that, I see.
Yeah, absolutely. You can do DNA testing up to you can do DNA testing for hair to about 2,000 years, depending on the quality of the hair. And I don't know the quality, so it could be damaged beyond that point, but it is possible in the right situation to do that sort of testing. But
It would be interesting in terms of the curse,
yes,
as the male or female.
who it was, especially because a lot of those curses were specifically, they actually identified, like, this is so-and-so, I am depositing their hair. So it would be really interesting to find out if they were actually depositing the correct hair.
Yeah, or at least the right gender.
Yeah, absolutely, the right gender, but it sort of puts it in the right direction of, well, we're probably assuming they're doing the right thing because they've done this, because they've claimed to have done it. I'd like to know whether or not their claim is legitimate. And yeah, we don't know, but I'd love to find out.
Accidents at the barber's shop or something
Yes.
like that. Oops, cursed the wrong person.
Yeah, I lost the hair someone gave me. They paid me to do this. I'm not asking them for another piece of hair. So I'm just going to find some random hair and tie it in, or do you just put it in without it? Yeah, absolutely. Does that explain the ones that didn't have hair but said it did? Did the person go, I've lost that hair, we're just going to wrap that up, no one's going to ask me any questions? Does that explain the missing? Or is it because misadventure had happened and they've lost the hair over time?
Or somebody took the hair because they
Potentially.
to for some.
Absolutely. Or was there something else going on?
Or it just didn't preserve.
Yeah, it just degraded. Did an animal come through? Did a bird steal it to make a nest? Like, it's all these things could have happened to it over the last 2,000 years. There's no way of knowing for sure.
Can I ask a question about I think one of the really interesting things that came from there's lots of really interesting things in the paper, but one of the really interesting things in the paper is the way in which the votive offerings have a different meaning when you see them on display as opposed to in the catalogue.
Yeah.
Right. And that's really striking. but are there parallels where magical artifacts, not necessarily human remains, but magical artifacts would be displayed in that kind of way? Or was magic something that had to be dealt with secretively because it had a suspicious character?
In the ancient world?
In the ancient world.
In the ancient world, magic was generally something you did hidden. It was not something to advertise. I mean, there's good magic and there's bad magic, depending on what the current laws were. So if you were doing magic for healing, advertise it to anyone, by all means. You absolutely advertise that. If you were protective magic, they would have amulets on the walls of their houses. It would be built into the doors, the floors, and those would be perfectly public. And some of the amulets are amazing. They have gorgons in Greece, because the gorgons are amuletic figure. It's meant to ward off evil, and you have huge amulets like that, the evil eye. But if it was things like a love spell, that was secretive. You don't advertise that sort of stuff because you're going against what you should be doing in society. So it sort of depends on the area, and the quieter stuff, absolutely hidden away. It was, you would know someone and you would ask them to do this, or someone might offer, and they might show themselves off to an individual client saying, I can do this for you, I can do that for you. But you'd have to be careful about having too many tools of the trade publicly available, because if you get called out for being a magician, there could be legal ramifications or social ramifications depending on the time period and where you were.
Any other questions? Yes.
Are there any societies that don't have this sort of thinking among some of the people?
Probably not, to be honest. I think magic, I mean,
In terms of magic,
in terms of having
Yeah,
magic,
the idea that you can seek revenge on
Indigenous Australians.
Sorry?
Indigenous Australians.
Australians don't.
There are, I think, 3 Indigenous societies that don't have magic, and Aboriginal Australians are one of them.
yes, but I've spoken to some people about that claim, and it really depends on how you define magic.
Yeah.
And that's a different discussion. And if the line between magic and science and religion is a knot. Like, it is not a line, it is just a full-on knot. And actually picking where you do it, one definition, the main definition does say Indigenous Australians don't, but if you use a different definition, they do. If you use different definitions, some do and some don't. So it's really, it depends on.
Yeah, I imagine that's a really big.
Yes, it is the current, probably the biggest debate in magic is what is magic, which is a hell of a thing for a topic to have.
In other societies and past societies,
Absolutely.
we might consider their knowledge to be very insecure, in which case, what are we doing labelling some of it magic?
And that's it.
It's not only that, but like, you can turn a fire green by chucking copper in there. Before they knew that was a chemical reaction, that was magic.
Yes. But at the same time,
exactly.
that was always science if they recognised that A did B and there was that. And some of the ways they treated science in the Greek period, there were some, Pliny the Elder, for example, talks about scientific finds. And looking at that back now, go, that's magic. But if Pliny says it's science, does that mean the ancient people thought it was science, not magic? Does that mean that we're actually putting a modern perspective of magic on this culture?
Incorrect science.
Yeah.
Magic.
Or are we putting, I mean, particularly for the Indigenous Australians question, is it a coloniser's perspective? Because, I mean, that was a huge issue at the very, very start of colonisation. Everything that was primitive religion was magic. And that's not actually what, by definition, magic is, but that's what they use it. They use it as a catch-all phrase. So then there was a backlash going, no, it's not magic, it's religion. But that itself inherently disqualifies the definition of magic. So it was almost just a social backlash in the academy to say none of it's magic, it's all religion. Whereas, well, no, it could be magic. If you define magic this way, then they all have a little bit of magic, but so do we. So it's not a bad thing, but they see magic as a negative. So it's almost like they had to take away that claim. And then we're trying to put the claim back going, it's not a negative. Magic is its own thing. It's not a bad thing. We have it now. It's not a problem. We need to look at it from this perspective and not use the social, cultural, negative attachment to the term magic and not treat it that way, which makes a whole different argument to what you're actually looking at.
I thought there were Aboriginal groups who thought they'd been subjected to magic by their enemies and made that claim.
Yes, but it depends if you call it magic.
Well, they thought that they'd been.
Yes, but did they use the term magic, or was the translator, the white translator, saying
Yeah.
magic,
That's the
not
other problem.
religion? They were saying something else.
True.
And so that's where the argument comes
Yeah.
in. It's who puts the term magic there and what do they
Yes.
actually mean by the term magic. I mean, the Egyptians actually had magic was called Heka, and it was actually a gift of the gods. It was something gifted by the gods, the ability to manipulate the world around you to an extent. And that was a gift. It was something to be used. It was something to be cherished in this particular format. And anything outside that format wasn't Heka. Therefore, it wasn't magic to the ancient Egyptians. But then you had the foreign Greeks come in with their magic. Was that magic? Was that Heka? Was that a different thing? You know what I mean? So there's so many different fractions to try and identify what's meant to be called what.
Fascinating, absolutely fascinating. If there's no further questions, then please join me in thanking Rebecca. Just before you go, a quick note that our next seminar will be on Thursday, the 7th of August, at the unusual time of 5 to 6 p.m, not on this campus, but in New Space, room X204, and also available online. Our speaker, co-sponsored by the Centre for Study of Violence, is Kent Schull from SUNY, who will present on Captain Robert Hoffman, Austrian artillery officer and artist with the Ottomans in World War I. And we hope to see you there.